When I started learning more about the truth, I felt a little betrayed actually by our government. I always thought that Canada was this wonderful place. My first introduction to reconciliation was actually through the United Church of Canada. Every conference throughout the country has what's called a youth forum, and it was there that I participated in my first blanket exercise. And what that exercise does is it kind of walks you through in an engaging way how colonialism took over North America. And it was really moving for me, and I learned a lot about the history, and I wanted to get further in. I wanted to see what I could do to fix things or educate others at least.
So about 2 years ago, when I was in grade 7, I was given the opportunity to do an exchange to Haida, which is an island just off BC. It's a big First Nations community. Well, since the exchange, I'd always kind of known about First Nations people from school, because it's a part of the curriculum to learn about their past, their traditions, but I really got into it once I went on that exchange. I really saw what it was like. I saw one of the residential schools. I met a lot of elders who had been in residential schools, and I talked to the kids whose lives have been affected by all these types of things, and I felt I really got another perspective by the trip. And ever since then, I've had a whole other outlook on what their life is and what they went through and are going through right now. I think what's unfair is, non-Indigenous children, they go to school, they have healthcare, they have what you would say a normal life. They go home, they have a snack, they watch TV, they do their homework. But Indigenous children, they maybe have an education. There's not always food for them to eat because it's expensive or hard to get, and they sometimes don't even have the opportunity to go to school if they have health problems and they can't get the care they need. And so it really sets an imbalance,
Indigenous people are way overrepresented in our federal prisons, as well as the Children Aid Society. We have a huge number of Indigenous children and youth in our child welfare system, or whatever it's called. They are incredibly overrepresented in situations like this because of this institutionalized racism, whether it's because they are more prone to being criminals by the government standards, or it's because the government found their parents to be unfit parents by what our history is. And really what it is often in Indigenous communities, the community raises the children. It's just a very different way of looking at things, and it became a system that the government would just put them in different categories that aren't, fit. For the United Church of Canada, reconciliation is really important. We acknowledge our past. Now it's all about moving forward. We have a cairn that marks the spot of the apology so that we can't forget what happened that day and where it happened. We work closely with communities, like I've said, to incorporate different aspects of Indigenous ceremonies that we can into our worship that's still respectful. 3 years ago, I believe it was, we changed our United Church crest actually to have the 4 colors of the medicine wheel on it to recognize our connection with Indigenous communities. I think Canadians just really need to learn respect. We are very good at respecting certain things. I'd say that we're a very respectful country. But when it comes to Indigenous issues, we often turn a blind eye or we don't understand. And I think it's about educating ourselves and then respecting what we learn.
If we shut this behind closed doors, we don't talk about all the residential schools and everything that happened years ago, then in 100 years it could happen all over again because no one would know that that happened in the first place. So I think it's important to talk about it, to learn from it. What has touched me the most is the injustice by the government. I mean, how they treat these people. Technically, this is their land, like they were here first. And we treat them, the government treats them as if they're nothing and that this isn't their land when it is. And we do not give them the same kind of rights, we do not give them the same kind of freedom as we would get, not the same type of education or medical care, and that's just not fair. I think people, like younger people like my age, know what reconciliation is, but they wouldn't necessarily call it reconciliation. They would call it like maybe like the bond between two people. I think reconciliation is like the really big word used by adults to describe it all, but I think younger people do know what it is and like do understand it.
They're starting to realize that we have this dark history, and it's really not okay with youth. I find that the youth today are very much social justice driven, and we want to make a change, we want to make things better. From a United Church perspective, I think that youth really need to be engaged with reconciliation, looking at not only our country's history, but our church's history and our involvement. We need to recognize that we can't make the same mistakes, and we need to not be disrespectful to any minority group. That's a tough question about whether or not reconciliation is, even on who has to do more work or if it's balanced. I think that we have to make huge strides. We really do. I think that there is a middle ground, but we're not there yet. And when we get there, then Indigenous communities are more than happy, from what I've felt thus far, to meet us there. They want to take those strides as well. But we just have to get there, and we need to learn about their history. We need to be respectful, and we need to acknowledge what has been done to this group of people. For me, reconciliation is a learning process, and it's really important for the two cultures to learn from each other, and it's about celebrating each other's cultures. The United Church of Canada and Indigenous communities across Canada have worked really closely to integrate some Indigenous things into our the way that we worship and things like that, the way we learn. We very much honor the history of our land because of them, because we're learning and because we know that some of this land isn't ours.
I think if an adult wants to get involved, then they should, of course. And I think you can do things by just discussing it with younger children, just like bringing it up and then finding out more information.
Advice for other young people, I would say first learn the facts. Figure out a way to find a reliable internet source that you can learn things, find a really good book, find an Indigenous community in your area and ask if someone will help teach you. Ask around for different organizations like Kairos or different social movements that are happening. I would say education is the key to reconciliation, and then from there move forward. Find an aspect of it that you're passionate about and help tell others, help make a change, and just be really celebratory of Indigenous culture. We are such an accepting church, and youth need to understand why that is. We need to understand why we are so open with our conversations when different parts of society aren't as open, because we want to be that welcoming space, and we want to have conversations between different groups of people to learn from one another and to move forward from the injustices that some of them feel, and to build a community that will be a community of social justice.